That'll teach you to ignore a stop work order, Mr. Garrison. Some of us actually care about property values. The voice was thick with the kind of smug satisfaction that only a true connoisseur of petty tyranny could muster. I stood there, my boots sinking slightly into the damp soil beside my 100-year-old barn, and stared up at the roof, or what was left of it. Where yesterday there had been a gleaming 30-kilowatt array of state-of-the-art solar panels, my retirement project, my Declaration of Independence, my promise to my wife, there was now just a mangled skeleton of aluminum racking and shattered silicon. Wires, snipped with brutal finality, dangled like severed nerves. The roof itself, the beautiful standing seam metal I'd had installed just last year, was gouged and twisted, violated, and standing there, with her arms crossed over a floral print blouse that was fighting a losing battle with her midsection, was Karen, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. A clipboard, her scepter of power, was tucked under one arm. Behind her, a white work van from a local roofing company was pulling away, leaving a trail of muddy tracks across my pasture. They had done this, on her orders. My heart wasn't pounding. It was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. 20 years in the Marine Corps, specializing in combat engineering, taught you to control your immediate response. You assess, you analyze, you don't react. But the ice in my veins was a different kind of cold. It was the Arctic chill of pure, unadulterated rage. I had sunk over $100,000 of my savings, my pension, into that system. It was designed to power our entire farm, to run the well pump, the workshop, and most importantly, the sensitive medical equipment my wife, Sarah, needed around the clock. The grid here was unreliable, and this was our lifeline. There was no stop work order, Karen, I said, my voice dangerously level. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I kept my eyes fixed on the wreckage, burning the image into my memory. I received no notice, no letter, no email, no vote from the board. She scoffed, a little puff of air. It was posted on the community bulletin board. As per Section 14, subsection C, all homeowners are responsible for checking the board for official notices. Your unapproved aesthetic modification was a clear violation. The community bulletin board was a corkboard behind a smudged plexiglass case next to the community pool that nobody used 8 months out of the year. I lived on a 10-acre plot at the farthest edge of the development, technically agricultural land that had been absorbed into the HOA's jurisdiction by a greedy developer 60 years ago. I was a mile from that damn board. An aesthetic modification? I finally turned to look at her. Her face was a mask of self-righteousness, her eyes small and hard. This is a functioning piece of agricultural equipment on a barn, Karen. It's exempt under state farming laws, and you know it. We discussed this when I submitted my plans. The Architectural Review Committee disagreed, she sniffed, and as president, when do I have the authority to enforce their decisions and remedy violations at the homeowner's expense? You'll be receiving the bill for the removal service, by the way, plus a $2,000 fine. She was actually smiling now. She had won. She had put the uppity new guy, the veteran who thought his service meant he could do whatever he wanted, back in his place. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She had no idea what she had just started. I took a slow breath, the smell of cut grass and diesel mixing with the metallic tang of my own fury. I pulled out my phone. I took a picture of the roof. Then I turned the camera on her. "Say that again," I said, my voice flat. Her smile faltered. "What?" "Tell me again what you did, for my records." Her face hardened, the smugness replaced by a flash of irritation. "I am not performing for your little camera, Mr. Garrison. You are the one in violation here. Read your bylaws." She turned, her orthopedic sandals squelching in the mud, and began her triumphant march back toward the pristine asphalt of the suburban street that ended abruptly where my gravel drive began. The sheer, unmitigated arrogance of it was breathtaking. She hadn't just destroyed my property. She was proud of it. She had trespassed, hired a crew to commit felony-level vandalism, and was now going to bill me for the privilege. That was the moment the cold stone in my chest began to heat up. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the power. It was about the deliberate, malicious destruction of something I had built with my own hands to protect my family. She had declared war. She just didn't realize her enemy was a man who had spent 2 decades planning, executing, and winning wars. If you know what it feels like to have your castle invaded by a petty tyrant with a clipboard, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. I want to hear your own HOA nightmares in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from. This fight was just getting started, and you're going to want to see how it ends. Now let me tell you how we got here. Sarah and I bought this place, the last acre as we called it, for one reason: peace. After my medical discharge, after more tours in dust-choked hellholes than I care to remember, all I wanted was quiet. I wanted to see trees, to work with my hands, to build something that sustained instead of destroyed. The 10 acres were perfect: a small, sturdy farmhouse, a massive old barn, outer and enough room for a market garden. The only catch was the HOA. The property was an anomaly, grandfathered in but still subject to the rules of the pristine suburb that had grown up around it. When we bought it, the HOA was a sleepy affair, mostly concerned with lawn length and holiday decorations. Then, 6 months after we moved in, Karen was elected president on a campaign of restoring community standards. Her reign began with a flurry of violation notices for things that had been ignored for years: trash cans left out an hour too long, a basketball hoop that wasn't the approved shade of beige. Her power was absolute because no one wanted the hassle of fighting her. They just paid the fine, painted the fence, and muttered curses under their breath. I had tried to stay off her radar. I read the bylaws cover to cover, a document more complex and contradictory than the Geneva Conventions. My solar project was my masterpiece. I spent 6 months on the design, consulting with agricultural engineers and legal experts. I chose panels specifically rated for agricultural use. I filed the plans with the county and got all the necessary permits. Then, as a courtesy, I submitted a copy of the plans to the HOA's Architectural Review Committee, along with a binder detailing the state laws exempting farm equipment and a personal letter explaining why the project was so critical for my wife's health. For 2 months, I heard nothing. Then I got a 1-sentence email: project pending review. I waited another month. Nothing. I followed up. No response. Finally, with the permits in hand and the contractor scheduled, I invoked the clause in the bylaws that stated any project not formally rejected within 90 days was deemed approved. I started the installation. That was my supposed crime. I had followed her own rules and she couldn't stand it. So she had bypassed them all: no written warning, no hearing, no board vote, and gone straight to the nuclear option. She had hired thugs to rip my life support system off my roof. As I walked back to the house, my phone already dialing the sheriff's department, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple lawsuit. This was going to be a campaign, a systematic, multi-front operation to dismantle not just her authority, but the entire rotten structure she had built around herself. Karen had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. She thought because I wanted peace, I was incapable of conflict. When that was a fatal miscalculation. I had spent a career turning chaos into order, and I was about to bring a world of meticulous, unforgiving order down on her head. The war for the last acre had begun. The sheriff's deputy, a young man named Miller, who looked like he was barely out of high school, arrived about 30 minutes later. His cruiser crawled down my gravel drive, a stark white and blue intrusion into my world of green and brown. He got out, adjusted his belt, and surveyed the scene with a practiced air of weary authority. Karen, who had apparently been lurking in her house across the street, saw the flashing lights and scurried back over, clipboard in hand, ready for her close-up. "Thank goodness you're here, officer," she began, positioning herself as the aggrieved party. "This man has been hostile and uncooperative ever since we had to remedy his unauthorized construction." I ignored her. I walked Deputy Miller over to the barn, pointing up at the mangled roof. 30 minutes ago, this woman, Karen Miller, the HOA president, admitted to me that she hired a private company to come onto my property and do this, I said, keeping my tone factual, devoid of emotion. "I have it on video. This is willful destruction of private property, vandalism, trespassing." Miller looked from the roof to me, then to Karen, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, did you hire someone to remove these panels?" Karen puffed up like a toad. I did, officer, as is my right as president of the homeowners association. Mr. Garrison was in clear violation of the covenants. He built this monstrosity without approval from the Architectural Review Committee. She tapped her clipboard triumphantly. I have all the paperwork right here. He was issued a stop work order. I was not, I stated calmly, and she can't produce one because it doesn't exist. Furthermore, the bylaws she's citing require a written warning, a chance to be heard at a board meeting, and a formal vote of the board to authorize any action like this. None of that happened. She acted unilaterally. Deputy Miller sighed. It was the sigh of a man who hated these calls. The messy, he said, she said neighborhood disputes that never had a clean resolution. He took the clipboard from Karen and flipped through the pages. It was mostly just copies of the bylaws she had highlighted with a pink marker. They were on a printout of the email I had sent her with my plans. There was no stop work order. There were no meeting minutes. Sir, she's claiming she had the authority under the HOA rules, Miller said, handing the clipboard back. This sounds like a civil matter to me. The 4 words every victim of HOA overreach dreads. A civil matter, I repeated, the ice in my voice dropping another 10 degrees. Deputy, if I went over to her house and hired a crew to rip her garage door off because I didn't like the color, would that be a civil matter? This is over $100,000 in damages. That's a felony. Well, that's different, he said, shifting his weight. You're not an HOA president. So there's a different standard of law for her, I pressed. She can commit felonies as long as she's holding a clipboard? Karen smirked. When he's being dramatic, officer, the bylaws are a contract. He violated the contract, and the contract allows for this remedy. It's perfectly legal. Miller looked back up at the roof. Look, sir, I understand you're upset, but without a clear criminal statute being broken, my hands are tied. The DA's office won't press charges in a case like this. They'll say it's for the courts to decide who's right based on the contract. My advice is to contact an attorney. He was already backing away, eager to escape. He wrote down an incident number on a small card and handed it to me. I'll file a report documenting your complaint and her statement, but that's the best I can do. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the shadow of my ruined barn with the architect of that ruin. The system, the first line of defense, had failed. It had deferred to her flimsy claim of authority. This was exactly what she counted on. People get intimidated. They see the uniform and the badge backing away, and they give up. They assume Karen's power is legitimate because no one in authority immediately tells her it's not. But I wasn't just people. I was Sergeant Major Jack Garrison, retired, and my entire world was now focused on a single objective. After Karen waddled away, victory assured in her mind, I went back to my systematic assessment. I spent the next 4 hours documenting everything. I took hundreds of high-resolution photos from every conceivable angle, close-ups of the cut wires, the bent racking, the deep scratches in the metal roof panels. I flew my small hobby drone over the barn, getting crystal-clear aerial footage of the entire scope of the devastation. I took a photo of the muddy tire tracks and a close-up of the brand name on a discarded coffee cup left by the work crew. Then I went inside and called my solar installer, a good man named Tom. I sent him the photos. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Oh my God, Jack, he finally said, his voice hushed. What happened? A tornado? Worse, I said. The HOA president. I could hear him typing furiously. Jack, this is catastrophic. They didn't just unbolt them. They used pry bars and cutters. They've destroyed the microinverters on every panel. The racking is bent beyond repair. And your roof, Jack, that's a standing seam galvalume roof. You can't just patch that. Those gouges have compromised the integrity of the panels. They'll have to be replaced. I know, Tom, I said grimly. I need a quote. Not for a repair, for a full replacement, everything. Panels, inverters, racking, wiring, and the roof. I want a quote to replace every damaged metal sheet. I want it itemized. Labor, materials, disposal of the old equipment, rush fees, everything. And I need a second itemized quote for damages. Loss of power generation, the cost of running the generator, the accelerated wear on my wife's backup battery systems. I want it all documented professionally on your company letterhead. It's going to be a big number, Jack, he warned. I want a big number, I said. I want a number that makes their insurance adjuster choke. He promised to have it for me by the end of the day. While I waited, I backed up all the photos and videos to 3 separate locations: a cloud server, an encrypted external hard drive, and a thumb drive I placed in my fireproof safe. Evidence is ammunition. You never go into a fight without a full magazine. That evening, the email from Tom arrived. I opened the attached PDF. 2 documents. The first was the replacement quote: new agricultural-grade panels with a higher efficiency rating, a more robust racking system designed to withstand hurricane-force winds, and the replacement of 12 full-length roof panels, plus labor. The total came to $215,000. The second document was the damages assessment. It calculated the lost kilowatt hours of generation based on the last 6 months of data, projected out over an estimated 6-month replacement timeline. It included the cost of diesel to run my backup generator 24/7 to power Sarah's equipment, the estimated cost of replacing the deep cycle batteries for her uninterruptible power supply, which were being destroyed by the constant generator use, and a fee for project management and consultation to deal with the rebuild. The total for damages came to $125,000. Grand total, $340,000. I stared at the number. It was obscene. It was horrifying. And it was perfect. It was a weapon. A number so large it couldn't be dismissed. A number that would get attention. A number that would turn this from a civil matter into a corporate crisis. I printed both documents in high resolution, then sat down at the kitchen table with the massive 3-ring binder that contained the HOA bylaws. Sarah came in and put her hand on my shoulder. She was pale, the stress of the day visible in the lines around her eyes. Her oxygen concentrator hummed softly in the next room, a constant reminder of what was at stake. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. I turned the printed quote around for her to see. Her eyes widened. "Oh, Jack." "It's okay," I said, my voice softer than it had been all day. "It's just a number, and we're not paying it." "They are." She looked at the stack of HOA documents on the table. "You're really going to do this, aren't you? You're going to war." I looked up at her, and for the first time that day, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "Honey," I said, "the war was declared this morning at 800. This is the counterinsurgency." The next few days were a blur of meticulous, infuriating research. Sarah, who had been a paralegal before her illness forced her to retire, was my invaluable partner. Once the kitchen table became our command center, littered with documents, highlighters, and sticky notes. The HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs, were our battlefield map. We read every single word of the 150-page document, and then we read it again. Karen had built her empire on the selective interpretation of this text, using it as a cudgel to terrorize residents. She assumed no one had the time or the will to actually read it closely. She was wrong. Our first breakthrough came on page 78, in the section on architectural control. Karen had cited a vague clause about maintaining the aesthetic harmony of the community, but 3 paragraphs down, we found it. Section 19.4, Enforcement and Remedies for Noncompliance. It laid out a rigid, multi-step process. First, not a written notice of violation must be sent via certified mail, detailing the specific bylaw being violated. Second, the homeowner must be given no less than 30 days to remedy the issue or to request a hearing. Third, if a hearing is requested, it must be held before the full board of directors. Fourth, only after the hearing can the board vote on levying a fine or authorizing further action. And finally, the killer clause. Any action involving the physical alteration or removal of property must be authorized by a majority vote of the board at a duly called meeting, and the homeowner must be given a final 14-day notice of this intended action. Karen had followed none of these steps, not one. She hadn't sent a certified letter. She hadn't given me 30 days. There had been no hearing, no board vote, no final notice. She had acted as judge, ex-jury, and executioner in direct violation of the very document she held up as her source of power. "She's naked," Sarah said, a spark of her old courtroom fire in her eyes. "She has no legal cover, The business judgment rule protects boards that follow their own procedures, even if they make a bad decision. But when you go rogue like this, the shield is gone. She's personally liable. And the HOA with her, I added, highlighting the entire section with a yellow marker. They're liable for the actions of their agent. Our next task was to understand the structure of that board. The bylaws listed 5 director positions: president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, and a member at large. Karen was president. A quick search on the community website gave me the other 4 names. Marcus Thorne, a retired accountant, was the treasurer. A woman named Brenda was the secretary. The VP and member at large were 2 other residents I vaguely knew by sight. The key question was, did they know what Karen had done? Had she lied to them? Or were they complicit? I suspected the former. Karen struck me as the type who consolidated power by keeping her subordinates in the dark. Information is power, and she wouldn't want to share it. This was our next angle of attack: isolate the target, separate her from her power base. I drafted a simple, polite email. I sent it to Marcus Thorne, the treasurer. Dear Mr. Thorne, it read, pursuant to my rights as a homeowner under Section 8.2 of the CC&Rs, access to records, I would like to request copies of the minutes from the last 3 board meetings. I would also like a copy of the board resolution authorizing the expenditure for, and in the action of, removing property from my residence at 1250 Old Farm Road on October 5th. Please provide these documents within the 10-day period stipulated by the bylaws. Thank you, Jack Garrison. It was a simple, non-confrontational request, phrased in the dry language of the bylaws themselves. But it was a guided missile. If the resolution didn't exist, and I knew it didn't, he couldn't provide it. This would force him to ask Karen where it was. It would plant the first seed of doubt and fear in his mind. He was the treasurer. He would be acutely aware of the financial implications of an unauthorized action that had caused, as my future demand letter would state, $340,000 in damages. While waiting for that seed to sprout, I moved on to the next phase, reconnaissance. I needed to know if my case was an isolated incident or part of a pattern. I spent the next afternoon walking the neighborhood, something I rarely did. I wasn't there to complain or rally support, not yet. I was just observing, gathering intelligence. I carried a small notepad. I saw the house with the freshly painted garage door, a slightly different shade of beige from its neighbors. I saw the elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, furtively tucking a small ceramic gnome behind a rose bush as I walked by. I saw the faint outline on a young family's lawn where a swing set used to be. These were the victims. I didn't approach them directly at first. Instead, I started with a man I knew was a fellow veteran. Dave, a retired Air Force pilot who lived 3 streets over. I'd waved to him a few times. He had a POW/MIA flag flying alongside the American flag on his porch. I walked up his driveway as he was polishing his immaculate Ford F-150. Afternoon, I said. Name's Jack Garrison. I live over on the old farm plot. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. He was a tall, lean man in his late 50s with a calm, watchful demeanor. Dave Kowalski, I know who you are. Heard you had some trouble with the Queen. He nodded his head in the general direction of Karen's house. You could say that, I said. She had my new solar array ripped off my barn roof. Dave stopped polishing and just stared at me. She what? You're kidding me. Wish I was. But that's criminal, he said, his voice low. The sheriff called it a civil matter. Dave let out a short, harsh laugh. Of course he did. Welcome to the neighborhood. That woman has terrorized this place for a year. I got fined $500 because my trash can was visible from the street for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. My son Mark put up a basketball hoop. We got a notice that it was an unapproved color. We painted it. Wrong shade of brown. We painted it again. Finally, we just took the damn thing down. She bleeds you dry with fines and frustration until you give up. This was it, the pattern. Did she follow procedure? I asked. Certified letters? Hearings? Dave shook his head. Just letters in the mailbox citing rules that probably don't even exist. Who has time to fight it? It's easier to just pay the $50, paint the stupid thing. But what she did to you, that's a different level. I'm fighting it, I said, my voice firm. And I'm not just fighting for my money back. And I'm going to remove her from power. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. He saw the determination in my eyes. He recognized a fellow warrior, even if our uniforms had been different colors. What do you need? He asked simply. For now? Just your story. And maybe the names of a few other people who've been on the wrong end of her clipboard. He nodded slowly. I can do that. Mrs. Gable, down the street, with the garden gnomes, the Millers with the swing set. She fined them because the wood wasn't cedar, it was pine. Go talk to them. Tell them Dave sent you, and tell them the guy on the farm is finally fighting back. I walked away from Dave's house with more than just names. I had my first ally. The resistance had begun. The small fire I had started was about to become a wildfire. Amra and Karen had no idea she was standing in the middle of a tinder-dry forest with gasoline-soaked boots. The next morning, I received a terse email response from Marcus Thorne, the HOA treasurer. Mr. Garrison, I am in receipt of your request. I am looking into the matter and will respond in due course. The tone was defensive, evasive. Perfect. My missile had hit. He was scrambling. He had gone to Karen, and she had either lied to him or told him to stonewall me. Either way, the wedge was in. Now it was time to apply pressure from another direction. With the list of names Dave had given me, I began what I called Operation Hearts and Minds. I started with Mrs. Gable. I found her tending her prize-winning roses, her back stiff with age but her hands nimble and sure. I introduced myself and mentioned Dave. Her eyes, which had been wary, softened slightly. That Dave is a good man, she said, snipping a dead bloom. He helped me with my sprinklers last spring. He told me you've had some trouble with the HOA, I said gently. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. Oh, that woman. Karen. She has no joy in her heart. She sent me a letter. A fine for my gnomes. She pointed to a large azalea bush. Peeking out from behind it was a small, brightly painted gnome with a fishing rod. She said they were tacky and detracted from the natural beauty of the neighborhood. My late husband, George, gave me that one. I've had him for 30 years. Her voice cracked. I just hide them now. I move them around so she doesn't see them. The pettiness of it was staggering. This wasn't about property values. This was about control. One about crushing any small spark of individuality or joy that she didn't personally approve of. Mrs. Gable, I said, what Karen did was wrong, but what she did to me was a felony. She caused hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to my property. I'm building a case against her, and I intend to have her removed as president. I'm not asking you to do anything public, but would you be willing to write down what happened to you? Just a simple, signed statement. It would help to establish a pattern of harassment. She looked from the gnome to my face, her gaze searching. Will it get her to leave us alone? I can't promise that, I said honestly, but I can promise that I will not stop until she is held accountable for her actions under the full extent of the law. She nodded slowly. All right, young man. For George's gnome, I'll do it. One down. My next stop was the Miller family, the ones who had been forced to remove their children's swing set. I found the father, a young man named Tom, out front mowing his lawn, a task he performed with a resentful energy. I gave him the same introduction. Yeah, Dave told me you might stop by, he said, shutting off the mower. Heard what she did to your barn. That's insane. What happened with your swing set? I asked. He kicked at a patch of grass. First, it was the wrong material. Had to be cedar. We bought a new one. $1,000. Then it was too close to the property line by 6 inches. We moved it. Then the canopy was the wrong color. It was forest green, had to be earth tone beige. My wife and I just gave up. We sold it on Facebook Marketplace. Told the kids it broke. My 6-year-old daughter still asks when we're getting a new one. He looked over at his pristine, empty backyard. We pay $400 a year in dues for this? To have our kids' toys legislated out of existence? I have a plan to fix this, I told him, and I laid out the same request. A signed statement, a piece of the mosaic of abuse I was assembling. You bet I'll sign it, he said. his jaw tight with anger. "You need anything else, you let me know. I'm tired of this." By the end of the day, I had 5 signed statements in my possession. Each one told a story of petty fines, arbitrary enforcement, and the slow, grinding erosion of the simple joy of owning a home. These weren't just anecdotes anymore. They were evidence. They were exhibits A through E in the case of Garrison versus Karen. With the community front opened, it was time to escalate the legal front. The next morning, I put on a collared shirt, my old military habits dying hard, and drove into the city. I had an appointment with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I had spent the previous evening researching the top property law attorneys in the state. I found her in a small boutique firm with a long list of victories against powerful developers and, more importantly, HOAs. Her name was Ms. Eleanor Albright. Her online photo showed a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Her office was on the 20th floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world away from my farm. The receptionist led me into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city. Ms. Albright was standing by the window, but she turned as I entered. She was exactly as her photo promised, formidable. "Wait, Mr. Garrison," she said, her voice crisp. "Eleanor Albright, you have 30 minutes. Impress me." There was no handshake, no small talk. I appreciated that. I walked over to her large mahogany desk and laid out my files in a neat row. "Ms. Albright, 5 days ago, my HOA president, acting without board approval and in direct violation of our CC&RS, hired a crew to trespass on my property and willfully destroy a $100,000 solar installation. I have video of her admitting to the act. I have a professional quote for $340,000 in replacement costs and damages. I have 5 signed witness statements from other homeowners detailing a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority, and I have a complete analysis of the bylaws she violated to do it." I pushed the files across the desk. The drone footage was already queued up on my tablet. When the itemized quote was on top, next to the highlighted bylaws and the witness statements, she didn't speak. She sat down, put on a pair of reading glasses, and began to read. She started with the quote, her eyebrows rising slightly at the total. She read my analysis of the bylaws, occasionally nodding to herself. She picked up the witness statements, her expression growing colder with each page. Finally, she picked up my tablet and pressed play. She watched the 30-second clip of Karen, smug and triumphant, admitting what she'd done. She watched it a second time. Then she set the tablet down and looked at me. A slow smile spread across her face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just spotted a wounded and very stupid gazelle. "Mr. Garrison," she said, leaning back in her chair. Mush, she didn't just pierce the corporate veil. She took a stick of dynamite and blew a hole in it the size of a truck. They've committed a tort. Several, in fact. Trespass to chattel, conversion, tortious interference with property. But the real beauty, she said, tapping the highlighted bylaws, is the breach of fiduciary duty. She had a duty to act in good faith and in the best interest of the association. Instead, she acted with gross negligence and malice, exposing the entire HOA, and by extension, every single homeowner who pays dues, to a catastrophic financial liability. She stood up and walked back to the window, looking down at the city below. "We're not just going to sue them, Mr. Garrison. We're going to dismantle them. We'll file a suit for the full amount, plus punitive damages. We'll file an injunction against Karen, barring her from acting in any official capacity. We'll send a demand letter to their insurance carrier that will give their underwriters a heart attack. We'll file a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office for abusive practices by a nonprofit corporation. By the time we're done, the other board members will be turning on her like a pack of wolves to save their own skins." She turned back to me, her eyes gleaming. "This isn't just a payday, Mr. Garrison. This is a statement. The retainer is $10,000. "When can we start?" I asked, pulling out my checkbook. The war was about to get a lot more expensive for the enemy. With Ms. Albright officially on board, the tenor of the conflict shifted. It was no longer just me against Karen. It was a disciplined veteran and a shark of a lawyer, backed by a growing civilian militia, against a petty dictator who was utterly oblivious to the forces massing against her. Our first official act was to launch a volley of legal paperwork so dense it would blot out the sun. Ms. Albright called it shock and awe. I called it giving them a taste of their own medicine. The centerpiece was the demand letter. It was a masterpiece of controlled fury, drafted by Albright and reviewed by me for factual accuracy. It was addressed not just to Karen, but to each of the 4 other board members personally, at their home addresses, and sent via certified mail with return receipt requested. It laid out the facts in cold, numbered paragraphs. It detailed the date of the trespass, the specific property destroyed, and quoted Karen's on-camera admission. Into it referenced the exact sections of the CC&Rs that she had violated. It included a full copy of the $340,000 quote and damage assessment, and it concluded with a simple, brutal demand. You have 30 days from receipt of this letter to remit payment in full for the sum of $340,000. Failure to do so will result in the immediate filing of a lawsuit against the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association and against each of you, its directors, in your personal capacity for breach of fiduciary duty and gross negligence. Sending a copy to each board member personally was a strategic masterstroke. It ensured none of them could claim they weren't informed. It bypassed Karen's control of the information flow, and it put each of them, the retired accountant, the stay-at-home mom secretary, on notice that their personal assets could be at risk. Be it their houses, their savings, their retirement accounts. Suddenly, this wasn't just Karen's problem with the guy on the farm. It was their problem. The second piece of the volley was a near-identical package sent to the HOA's insurance company. But this one included something extra: the witness statements from Mrs. Gable and the other harassed homeowners. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about establishing a pattern of reckless and malicious behavior, led by the board's president. Insurance companies have a term for this: a moral hazard. They hate it. It suggests the person they are insuring is actively creating risk rather than avoiding it. It was a direct invitation for the insurance company to start asking its own hard questions. The third and final piece was the formal complaint to the state agency that regulated HOAs. It was a long shot. Those agencies are often underfunded and overwhelmed, but it added another layer of official scrutiny. It created another file, another case number, another government official who would eventually be calling Karen and asking for an explanation. We mailed everything on a Monday morning. The return receipts started coming back by Wednesday. I imagined the scenes in those 4 other houses as the board members opened their mail, the casual curiosity turning to confusion, then to dawning horror as they read the letter and saw the number: $340,000. I could almost hear the frantic phone calls. Marcus, did you get a letter from a lawyer? Brenda, what the hell is this? Did you know about this? Karen, what did you do? The first visible sign of the impact came on Thursday. I received another email from Marcus Thorne, the treasurer. The tone was no longer terse and dismissive. It was panicked. Mr. Garrison, I have received some very disturbing correspondence. I was not aware of the specifics of the action taken at your property. The board did not vote on or approve this. We need to speak immediately. Can you please call me? I forwarded the email to Ms. Albright. Her reply was succinct. Don't. Let him stew. We don't talk to them. We only communicate through formal channels. Let them feel the full weight of their legal jeopardy. They are not your friends. They are defendants. It was hard advice to take. My instinct was to engage, to explain, but she was right. This was no longer a conversation. It was a legal proceeding. Every communication had to be calculated. The next day, Friday, a new character entered the drama: a man in a cheap suit driving a beige sedan. He parked on the street and spent an hour taking pictures of my barn from the public road. Then he walked over to Karen's house and was inside for nearly 2 hours. He was the insurance adjuster. The wolves were beginning to circle. That weekend, the community was buzzing. You could feel the tension in the air. People who used to just nod as they got their mail were now stopping and talking in hushed groups. My phone rang. It was Dave Kowalski. Jack, you've kicked the anthill. Karen's been running around like a chicken with its head cut off. She's telling people you're trying to bankrupt the HOA with a frivolous lawsuit. She's trying to paint you as the villain. Let her, I said. Her narrative is collapsing. The truth is in those letters. It's working, he said. Marcus Thorne called me this morning. He was fishing for information, trying to figure out how much I knew. He sounded terrified. He said the insurance company might deny the claim because Karen acted without authorization. That was the plan, I said. What else? She's called a special community meeting. Tuesday night, the high school auditorium. The email says it's to address the pending legal action and ensure community solidarity. She's going to try to get in front of this and control the story. She's going to try to turn everyone against you. I felt a grim smile touch my lips. Dave, I said, that's not a problem. That's an opportunity. Tell me, does the high school auditorium have a projector and a screen? Yeah, a big one. Chudui, why? Because it's time for a movie night, I said, and I'm bringing the popcorn. Karen's attempt to control the narrative was the single biggest strategic blunder she could have made. She was taking a fight that had been waged in letters and back channels and dragging it into a public forum, where she thought her charisma and authority would win the day. She was about to learn a very hard lesson about fighting a prepared enemy on a battlefield of their choosing. I spent the next 2 days with Sarah preparing a PowerPoint presentation. It was simple, clinical, and devastating. Slide 1. A high-resolution aerial photo from my drone showing the beautiful, fully functional solar array with the date it was taken. Slide 2. An identical aerial photo taken the day of the destruction showing the mangled wreckage. Slide 3. A close-up of the $340,000 itemized quote with the major costs highlighted. Slide 4. The text of Section 19.4 of the bylaws, the one detailing the required multi-step enforcement process, with each step she skipped highlighted in red. Slide 5. A simple, bold question. Was there a board vote authorizing this action? And finally, the star of the show, embedded as the final slide. The video. The 30-second clip of Karen, standing in my field, her face a mask of smug triumph, admitting to everything. I also prepared a handout, a one-page summary of the facts with the relevant bylaw section printed at the bottom. I made 200 copies. Dave, meanwhile, was my man on the ground. He rallied our small group of allies, Mrs. Gable, Tom Miller, and the others. He didn't ask them to speak, just to be there, to be a visible presence. Their job was to lend silent support. When Tuesday night arrived, the auditorium was more packed than I'd ever seen it. At least 150 homeowners were there, a mix of curiosity, anxiety, and anger filling the air. Karen and the other 4 board members were sitting at a long table on the stage. Karen was in the center, looking imperious. The others, Marcus Thorne in particular, looked like they were waiting for a root canal. I took a seat in the 3rd row, with Dave on one side and Tom Miller on the other. Mrs. Gable was a few rows behind us, a small, determined look on her face. I had my laptop in my bag and a USB drive in my pocket. The meeting began. Karen stood up and tapped the microphone. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice oozing a false sincerity. When I know there are a lot of rumors and a lot of misinformation circulating in our community, so I wanted to give everyone the facts directly. She launched into a 10-minute tirade, portraying herself as the vigilant protector of community standards and property values. She described my solar panels as an illegal industrial eyesore. She claimed I had been arrogant and dismissive of the committee's concerns. And then came the lie. Despite multiple warnings and a formal stop work order, Mr. Garrison proceeded with his unapproved project, forcing the board to take the difficult but necessary step of remedying the violation, as is our right and our duty under the bylaws. A murmur went through the crowd. This was the story she had been spreading. It sounded plausible, if harsh. Now, she continued, her voice rising, Mr. Garrison is attempting to extort this community with a ludicrous, frivolous lawsuit for an astronomical sum. He wants to bankrupt our HOA. He wants to force a massive special assessment on every single one of you, all because he didn't want to follow the same rules as everyone else. This was her kill shot. She was turning me into the common enemy, the threat to their wallets. I could feel the mood in the room shifting against me. People were looking at me, their expressions hardening. It was now or never. I stood up. That's a lie, I said, my voice calm but loud enough to carry through the auditorium. Karen's head snapped in my direction. You are out of order, Mr. Garrison. This is not a debate. I have a right to be heard, I said, taking a step into the aisle. You've made public accusations against me, and I have a right to respond. Sit down or I'll have you removed, she shrieked, her composure cracking. That was the cue. Dave Kowalski stood up. He has a right to speak, he boomed, his Air Force command voice cutting through the noise. Then Tom Miller stood up. Let him talk. Then another homeowner, then another. Within seconds, a dozen people were on their feet, demanding I be given the floor. The board members looked at each other in panic. The meeting was slipping from Karen's grasp. Marcus Thorne, looking ghostly pale, leaned over and whispered something to her. She glared at him, then back at me, her face contorted with rage. Fine, she spat. You have 2 minutes. Thank you, I said. I walked to the front of the auditorium. I don't need 2 minutes. I just have a few simple questions for the board. And I have a short presentation that will clarify the facts for everyone. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and walked toward the stage. Could someone help me plug this into the projector? A student who was running the AV booth, seeing the drama, eagerly ran down to help. Karen was sputtering. This is not part of the agenda. I will not allow this. But it was too late. The first slide flashed onto the huge screen behind her, the before picture of my gleaming solar array. A collective gasp went through the room. Most of them had only heard about it. They had never seen it. It didn't look like an industrial eyesore. It looked clean, modern, and impressive. This was my property on the morning of October 5th, I said, my voice resonating through the microphone I had taken. And this, I clicked to the next slide, is what it looked like a few hours later, after our HOA president took action. The image of the wreckage filled the screen. It was brutal and shocking. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder, more disturbed. The bill to replace what was destroyed and repair the damage to my barn is $340,000, I continued, clicking to the next slide showing the quote. Karen claims I was issued warnings and a stop work order. I was not. I invite her to produce them now. The bylaws she claims to be enforcing, I clicked again, showing the highlighted section 19.4, require certified letters, hearings, and a full board vote for an action like this. I have a question for the treasurer, Mr. Thorne. I turned to look directly at him. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Mr. Thorne, was there a meeting where the board voted to authorize this destruction? Are there minutes of that meeting? Marcus Thorne stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He looked at Karen, who was shooting daggers at him. The entire room was silent, waiting for his answer. Well, no, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. There was no formal vote. A wave of shock rolled through the audience. Karen's lie had been exposed, not by me, but by her own treasurer. So the president acted alone, I pressed, without the board's knowledge or approval? Thorne just nodded miserably, unable to speak. The final nail. I turned back to the audience. So our president trespassed, ordered the destruction of private property, and lied to all of you about it, exposing this entire community to a massive liability. She didn't do it to protect property values. She did it because she could. And if you don't believe me, I clicked to the final slide. Then believe her. The video started playing. The audio was crystal clear through the auditorium sound system. Karen's smug face filled the screen. That'll teach you to ignore a stop work order, Mr. Garrison. Some of us actually care about property values. The video ended. The auditorium was utterly silent for a full 5 seconds. You could have heard a pin drop. Then a single voice from the back, an older man shouted, "Resign! Resign now!" The chant was picked up by another, then another, until the entire room was a roaring chorus of, "Resign! Resign! Resign!" Karen stood there, frozen, her face a mottled canvas of fury and humiliation. She had walked into her own public execution, and I had handed her the axe. The game was over. She just didn't know it yet. And the fallout from the community meeting was swift and brutal. It was like a dam breaking. The fear that had held the community in Karen's thrall for so long was washed away by a tidal wave of collective anger. Her power, which had always been an illusion built on bluff and intimidation, evaporated in the harsh light of public exposure. The next morning, my phone started ringing. It was Marcus Thorne. This time I took the call and put it on speaker, with Sarah taking notes. "Mr. Garrison, Jack," he began, his voice strained and desperate. We, the rest of the board had no idea. She told us you were refusing to cooperate, that everything was being handled by the book. We had no idea she acted unilaterally. We never would have approved that. Never. And yet, here we are, Marcus, I said, my tone unforgiving. You're the treasurer, and you had a fiduciary duty to oversee the HOA's finances and actions. You let her run wild. I know, he pleaded. We messed up. We were intimidated by her, but we're ready to make it right. The insurance company contacted us this morning. They're sending a reservation of rights letter. Their preliminary finding is that Karen's actions constitute willful and malicious acts, which are explicitly excluded from our policy. They're saying they may not cover the claim. I almost smiled. This was even better than I'd hoped. A reservation of rights letter is an insurer's way of saying, we'll defend you for now, but we reserve the right to refuse to pay the final judgment, and we might even sue you later to get our legal fees back. It put the financial time bomb squarely back in the laps of the HOA and its directors. So if they don't pay, the $340,000 plus my legal fees, which are substantial, will come from the HOA's reserves, I stated, letting the implication hang in the air. Our reserves are only $100,000, he whispered, his voice cracking. It would mean a special assessment of over $5,000 per household. The community would crucify us. They should be crucifying Karen, I replied. What are you going to do about her? We're holding an emergency board meeting tonight. Without her, we're voting to remove her as president and as a director, effective immediately for cause. We're prepared to offer you the full settlement amount paid out from our reserves and an emergency line of credit we're scrambling to secure. We'll pay the special assessment ourselves if we have to. We just want this to be over. Please, won't tell your lawyer to stand down. I listened to his frantic pleading, a man drowning in the consequences of his own cowardice. He and the other board members had enabled her reign of terror through their passivity, and now that the bill had come due, they were desperate to save themselves. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus, I said, my voice like granite. You will proceed with your vote. You will deliver to my lawyer, Ms. Albright, a signed copy of the resolution removing Karen from the board. You will also deliver a signed settlement agreement drafted by my lawyer, agreeing to pay the full $340,000 plus all legal fees within 60 days. The agreement will also include a formal, public apology to me and my wife, to be posted on the community website and mailed to every homeowner. In exchange for that, and the lawsuit will name only the HOA as a corporate entity and not you and the other directors in your personal capacities. Do you understand? It was a lifeline, and he grabbed it. Yes, thank you. We'll do it. Anything. One more thing, Marcus, I added. You will also vote to immediately abolish the Architectural Review Committee. All of it. Disband it. Any future aesthetic issues will be governed solely by city and county ordinances. No more beige paint swatches or gnome patrols. There was a pause. We can do that? You're the board, I said. You can do whatever you want. It's time you started acting like it. That evening, they held their meeting. According to Dave, who stood outside the community clubhouse with a few other residents, they could hear shouting through the walls. Karen had apparently shown up and tried to force her way in, claiming the meeting was illegal. The other board members, newly emboldened, had physically blocked her path and told her she was no longer welcome. The vote was unanimous. Karen was stripped of her title and her power in a single ignominious motion. The next day, a courier delivered a thick envelope to Ms. Albright's office. It contained the signed resolution and the executed settlement agreement. It was over. The war was won. But there was one loose end: Karen. Stripped of her presidency, she was now just another resident. But she was a resident who had, through her malicious actions, cost her neighbors a fortune. The new board, led by a chastened Marcus Thorne, was now faced with a choice: absorb the cost through a massive special assessment, or pursue the one person who was actually responsible. Under immense pressure from the community, and with the quiet legal guidance of Ms. Albright, consulting for the board pro bono as a favor to me, they made their choice. They filed a lawsuit on behalf of the HOA against Karen Miller, personally, to recoup the full amount of the settlement they had been forced to pay me. Her own business judgment rule shield was gone, and the weapon she had wielded against so many, the threat of legal action, was now turned squarely on her. The irony was poetic. The final confrontation was not as dramatic as the meeting. It was quiet, almost pathetic. A few weeks later, a "for sale" sign went up in front of Karen's meticulously manicured house. I saw her one last time, directing movers as they loaded her belongings into a truck. And her floral blouses and her self-righteous certainty were gone, replaced by a gray sweatsuit and the vacant, hollowed-out look of someone who had lost everything. Our eyes met across the street. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just held her gaze. In my eyes, she wouldn't see triumph. She would see the calm, steady resolve of a man who had simply done what needed to be done. She had started a war with a man who wanted only peace, and in the end, she had been utterly, comprehensively, and quietly defeated by her own hubris. She looked away first, scurrying into her car without a backward glance, and then she was gone. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The reign of terror was officially over. The months that followed the settlement were a period of reconstruction, both literally and figuratively. The first check from the HOA arrived within 30 days, a massive sum that made my bank manager's eyes water. Ms. Albright took her well-earned fee, and the rest was immediately put to work. Tom, my solar installer, was a man of his word. He had his crew on site the following Monday. They worked with the precision of a military unit, first carefully stripping the damaged metal panels from the barn roof, exposing the strong timber bones beneath. Then, new, gleaming sheets of galvalume were lifted into place, each one perfectly aligned and sealed, better and stronger than what was there before. Then came the main event, the new solar array. The panels were a newer generation, more efficient, with a sleek, black-on-black design that looked less like an addition and more like an integral part of the barn itself. The racking was heavy-duty. It rated for 150-mile-per-hour winds. Tom oversaw every connection, every bolt, every wire. He was not just doing a job, he was restoring a dream that had been desecrated. As the panels went up, one by one, it felt like a flag being raised over a reclaimed territory. It was a visible symbol, not of defiance, but of resilience. It was a statement that we would not be broken by petty tyranny. While the barn was being healed, the community was undergoing its own form of repair. Marcus Thorne, to his credit, seemed to have learned a hard lesson in leadership. He and the new board, which included Dave Kowalski as the new vice president, began a systematic process of dismantling Karen's oppressive regime. Their first act was to pass the resolution I had demanded, the complete and permanent dissolution of the Architectural Review Committee. An email went out to all homeowners announcing the change, stating that going forward, the HOA would only enforce violations of city ordinances and the core covenants relating to safety and structural integrity. The beige paint tyranny was over. A few days later, I saw Mrs. Gable out in her front yard. She wasn't hiding her gnomes anymore. She had a whole village of them, proudly displayed amongst her roses. George's gnome, the one that started it all, was right in the center. She saw me walking my dog and waved, a bright, genuine smile on her face. "Isn't it a lovely day, Mr. Garrison?" she called out. It was. It truly was. The new board's next action was to call a special meeting to explain the financial situation. Marcus stood before the community, no longer hiding behind a table on a stage. He stood on the floor at their level. He explained the lawsuit, the settlement, and the reason for it. He didn't sugarcoat his own culpability or that of the previous board. He apologized. And then he laid out the plan. The HOA would take out a loan to cover the remainder of my settlement, to be paid back over 5 years. This would require a modest, temporary increase in dues, far less than the catastrophic special assessment they had all feared. And he announced the HOA's lawsuit against Karen, explaining that any funds recovered would be used to pay down that loan and restore the reserves. He was met not with anger, but with applause. Honesty, it turned out, was a powerful tool. The lawsuit against Karen dragged on for a while, as lawsuits do. Her defense was that she was acting in the HOA's best interest, but with the video, the testimony of the board, In her long history of harassment, it was a hopeless case. Eventually facing financial ruin from legal fees alone, she settled. The sale of her house provided enough to pay a significant portion of the judgment back to the HOA. It wasn't everything, but it was justice. A few months after the installation was complete, Sarah and I were sitting on our back porch. It was a cool autumn evening. The new panels on the barn roof were silhouetted against a brilliant sunset. Inside the house, all was quiet. The diesel generator that had been our noisy, fume-belching companion for months was gone, sold for scrap. Sarah's medical equipment hummed along silently, powered by the sun. I had just finished checking the new monitoring system. The array was overperforming, generating more power than we could possibly use. We were feeding a steady stream of clean energy back into the grid. Our electric meter was literally spinning backward. Sarah reached over and took my hand. "You did it," she said softly. "You brought the peace back." I looked at her, at the steady rhythm of the machine that kept her with me, powered by the quiet, inexhaustible energy of the sun. I looked out at my barn, my fields, my home. It hadn't been a fight I wanted, but it was a fight that had been necessary. It had cost us time and stress, and it had forced me to revisit a part of myself I had hoped to leave in the deserts of Iraq and Afghanistan, the cold, methodical strategist. But looking at the results, it was worth it. We hadn't just won back our money or our power. We had reclaimed our home. We had helped an entire community break free from the grip of a petty tyrant. Yet we had replaced a system of arbitrary control with one of reason and respect. The greatest victory was not the $340,000 check. It was the quiet, the hum of the inverter, the sight of Mrs. Gable's gnomes, the sound of the Miller kids' laughter as they played on their new swing set, a bright, primary-colored one this time, with a forest green canopy. It was the simple, profound peace of a community that had found its way back to being neighbors instead of suspects. I squeezed Sarah's hand. "We did it," I corrected her, "and we never have to do it again." The sun dipped below the horizon, but the batteries were full, and the lights in our house burned brightly, a small, steady beacon on the last acre. Justice had been served. Peace was restored.